Welcome back. Thanks for staying with Morning Live. South Africa's GDP contracted by 0.6% in the third quarter. This after rebounding by a revised 3.2% in the second quarter in 2019. Mining, manufacturing and transport were the biggest drags on growth in gross domestic product. Added to this, credit rating agencies have all revised South Africa's economic outlook to negative. So what could 2020 have in store on the financial front? Well, I'm joined now on the line by Chief Economist at Econometrix, Azar Jammine. A very good morning and welcome to Morning Live.
Good morning to you and to your viewers, and a Happy New Year to you all.
Thank you so much, and to yourself. Let's begin by looking at the GDP, which barely grew by 2% in 2019. Will 2020 be better or worse?
I think 2020, the general expectation is that it will still be quite weak, but the hope is that it will be marginally better than 2019. But, you know, there are many unknowns that could distort it either in an upward or a downward direction. But we are hopeful that it might be marginally better than last year.
What is that hope resting on?
The hope rests on a number of factors. The first is that the global economy seems to be recovering following a slight downward pattern seen during around the middle of the year into the third quarter. Secondly, the rate of inflation has turned out to be quite a bit lower than people had anticipated, and this will mean that people's salaries and bonuses and wages will keep up a little better with the rate of increase in prices than one had hoped for, giving them a little bit of extra disposable income. And then there are hopes that some of the agricultural sector will revive. Much of the negative growth that we had last year was derived from the fact that agricultural output kept contracting due to drought conditions and the like. And the hope is that there will be a slight improvement in that. Also, what is assisting us is the fact that precious metals prices, especially the price of palladium, is exceeding, has been going up quite strongly lately. And on the other side, the cost of oil imports has been falling because of oil prices remaining fairly low and the rand being reasonably strong.
We've had a technical recession. S&P and Fitch have us at junk status. Moody's keeping us at investment grade, but with the outlook as negative. What should government be doing to change this?
What government should be doing to change this are basically threefold factors. Firstly, it needs to undertake certain structural reforms in the economy to try and improve growth. And here we're talking about fighting corruption to free up resources for other service delivery projects. We're talking about improving the educational system to render people more productive. We're talking about reducing the concentration of power in the hands of the large organizations in this country, be they SOEs or big businesses, and trying to promote small business activity by deregulating the economy, getting rid of some ridiculous regulatory constraints such as visa requirements, such as an overly expensive spectrum network for one to conduct internet facilities, and many other regulatory restrictions on small businesses in terms of having to comply with all sorts of issues that are very costly to manage. Secondly, we need to get the government to improve the functioning of SOEs so that they become less of a liability on government having to keep bailing them out with taxpayers' money. And thirdly, we need to try and restrict the increase in government expenditure, especially on the public service that has been exceptionally rapid in recent years, way in excess of what we're seeing in the private sector. those three factors, if they were to be enacted, could persuade ratings agencies to give us a chance and not downgrade us further. Because as things stand right now, tax revenues are likely to be lower than expected. Government spending is likely to be higher than expected, especially helped along by the need to bail out SOEs. And as we carry on this way, the public debt level is set to rise very, very sharply. And that in turn means that the interest that government will have to pay on borrowing money so rapidly is going to start squeezing out its ability to spend on every other form of government spending.
Mining and manufacturing are on a very steep decline. That's something that certainly is going down. Overall, 6%. Finance and government spending seem to be keeping South Africa afloat, however. But that's something that just is not sustainable, is it?
No, it's not sustainable, and that is the whole point. It's going to involve quite a confrontation between government and the trade unions, especially in the public sector, whether they work for SOEs or whether they work for the government or municipalities themselves, in order to try and persuade them to free up resources in other areas. The problem is that they'll retort and say, yes, but you, government, are responsible for a lot of this dilemma because you've been embarking upon corrupt activities that has wasted far more money than is involved in giving us a pay rise. So that is one of the big contentions that will have to be sorted out if we are to avoid further credit ratings downgrades.
Nominal GDP in the third quarter of 2019 was estimated at 1.29 trillion. That was higher than the 1.26 trillion recorded in the second quarter. It may increase in the fourth quarter due to the festive season spending. Do you foresee that? Because usually in the first quarter of the year, people are a lot more frugal.
Yes, I think we should probably see nominal GDP increasing further. You've got to bear in mind that nominal GDP is actual GDP plus inflation, and with inflation running at 4.5%, as long as your growth rate is not negative 3.5-4%, you're bound to see further increases in nominal GDP, and as a result, further increases in retail spending. By all accounts, for example, Black Friday was an exceptionally strong day in terms of spending. What we don't know is how much of that spending capacity was absorbed from other times, certainly away from December, which is traditionally a high spending period, and brought forward to November, or whether there was a real increase in overall spending. My suspicion is that there was a marginal real increase, which would translate into a reasonable nominal increase in expenditure. In other words, when you take the actual amount spent in volume terms and you add inflation to it, you could get a slightly positive figure.
How much of that is real spending, though, and how much of it is actually people going further and further into debt?
There are indications that people have been increasing debt in order to sustain their spending patterns, but I think in relation to the kind of increases in debt that we were accustomed to seeing a decade ago, what we're seeing currently is not all that scary. It is worrisome, especially for poorer people, and there are reports of unemployed people actually embarking upon borrowing money, which is quite scary. But it's, in the broader scheme of things, it won't affect the overall economy too badly, although it might affect a certain category of people quite badly. But you've got to bear in mind that the spending by poorer people in this country accounts for a very small percentage of overall spending and economic growth in the country.
What is your money advice for people in the new year?
My money advice is whatever you do, try and keep your job. And if you do have a job, be a little less demanding in terms of what you request for as pay increase, or else you might find yourself on the street. And secondly, just resist these tempting loans to try and bail yourself out because they'll catch up with you in the longer term. It's a tough environment, and I think people need to bear in mind that they will be under pressure.
We spoke a little bit earlier on about the hope, but that was really on a macro level. If we have to just zoom down to the real man on the street, to our everyday lives, where can people find economic hope just in their daily lives for the general South African?
I think the hope really lies in the hope that the government somehow gets it together to start acting on clamping down on corrupt activities in order to save money and free resources to spend elsewhere. And also the hope lies in the determination of government to try and get more private sector activity going to be the driver of economic growth and employment creation, because that's where the jobs really lie. At the moment, there's a reluctance on the part of the private sector to embark upon new ventures because government is just squeezing out the private sector's ability to try and do something innovative and to come out with new projects through through a very strict regulatory environment. But the trouble is that the working class doesn't altogether appreciate this and keeps calling for harsher action against the private sector rather than trying to encourage more private sector activity.
There was a headline in the Sunday papers a couple of weeks ago about the debt bubble that is facing a number of middle-class South Africans. Earlier in the conversation, I was surprised you said that we need to bear in mind that on a macro scale, it doesn't make too much of a difference. But is it concerning at all that there may be this debt bubble, which will, for many South Africans, affect their day-to-day life?
Of course, it is something to bear in mind that will be negative, and that we've got to bear in mind that it can actually get out of hand if not constrained. But I think I'm seeing it in the broad relative situation. I've seen debt levels spiraling out of control to a far greater extent in the middle class in about a decade ago. And in relation to that, what we're seeing currently is far more constrained than what we did experience a decade ago. To put it bluntly, in numerical terms, the ratio of household debt to disposable income soared from 52% at the turn of the century to around 86% a decade later. It's now down to 72%. That means it hasn't actually risen. It's come down over the past decade. What people are concerned about is that it has stabilized. It has not carried on going down more recently. But generally speaking, people are not increasing their debt massively compared with what they're earning as an income. But at least what people are getting worried about is that declining trend of indebtedness has come to an end, and people are starting to bite again on and be seduced into borrowing anew.
All right, that's Dr. Azar Jammine. Thank you so much for chatting to us. Really great insights. Chief Economist at Econometrix, giving us his economic outlook for South Africa in 2020 and some sage advice to say if you've got a job, look after it. Don't be too harsh in your demands and don't take out new debt. Do stay with Morning Live. We'll be back after this.
They need to step up and take responsibility.